Good afternoon and Happy New Year. I am Karen Sims with the Trauma and Resiliency Initiative with Reverend Thomas, and we are kicking off our new year of the See You Try show. It has been a long break and season, and I thought the best way to kind of kick off the new year with somebody who I love talking to, who has so much wisdom and insight, and that we could have a great conversation and also offer tips and strategies and solutions. And so see this as a conversation. As always, want to remind you that the views and the opinions of our guests are their own, but we're able to do the show thanks to the generous support of the Champaign County Mental Health Board and other partners. Last but not least, we always welcome questions. And so if you want to put those in the Facebook chat, I will look and try to make sure I field them as best I can. Multitasking, we don't have Samir kind of helping us with that task right now. But I will do my best to make sure that if you have questions for us, to do that. So Reverend Thomas, can you introduce yourself? I didn't give you your full bio, but maybe you can give folks your brief bio.
My brief bio. Okay. I am the Reverend Terrence Thomas, a regular old reverend, pastor of Bethel AME Church, the oldest African-American church in Champaign, Rantoul, etc. I am also the executive director of the Bridgewater Sullivan Community Life Center. Been in Champaign about 3 years. This is year 3 going into year 4. I am an ordained clergy with the African Methodist Episcopal Church. And I guess my areas of specialty would be Black life culture and spiritual care, or what used to be known as pastoral care, trauma, coping mechanisms, etc. It's good to be here. It's been a while. I think the last time we did this was at the start of the pandemic.
I think so. That's why when I was looking at like what has been, what I've done and what we've done and where we should start, I was like, we're right back where we started. We've talked a little bit. You came on when in my absence to talk about Black men and mental health, but you and I haven't had a conversation over the course of the year. So what does it feel like to be back? Maybe what feels different about now than the last time you and I talked?
It's funny. I was just talking to my church admin about whether or not to shut down again. So I'm at the place where I was in February 2020, sitting at my desk, weighing the pros and cons. And I hit her with that old baseball saying, it's deja vu all over again. Mm-hmm. I think this time, it's a little more, well, the first time was fear and unknown. This time it's anger and disappointment, because we as a nation, as a community, has still not kind of got the memo. And so I think I read somewhere that the rates here in Champaign are something like 18,000, like it's jumped. No, the state is 18,000 a day. Champaign, I think the last time I thought was up to 300 or 400 new cases. I got colleagues back home in Chicago who's people are sending their kids to school with COVID because they can't take off work, infecting the teachers. And that's what led to the big teacher pushback. Even as part of Bridgewater Sullivan, as we do this rental assistance program, we see the impact of COVID, and people literally, I had to go to work sick, and I masked up. I got it now. I'm on the tail end. And of course, now we know the CDC Dr. Fauci has ultimately disappointed all of us by saying, hey, listen, it went from 15-day quarantine to 10, now 5. And so it is real. I had it at the end of November. Didn't publicize it, didn't broadcast it, but just the way people are careless, and I don't even know how to contact trace it. And so I think that it's, to your point about we're doing this all over again, it's frustrating. It's frustrating, and that frustration can make you weary. It can make you tired, because it's like, at what point do we get the memo? There's no reason not to be vaccinated. There's no reason not to wear a mask. These are the kind of moments where you do have to wrestle with the freedom over the wholeness of the society. And I just wish we had a leader, president, governor that said, listen, don't come out the house. You come out the house, it's a penalty. Like, and if we could do that just for 90 days, imagine what we can stop, you know.
You said a lot. And I think, when you look at Australia or Hong Kong or other places on the planet that maybe started their COVID journey. South Korea is one of the ones that I use that started their COVID journey around the same time that we started our COVID journey. And their numbers are negligible, right? They have very few people, very few outbreaks. People always remind me that there are cultural difference. They say, because we prioritize independence and freedom here, it is impossible for there to be any restrictions or rules or conversations about that. But we know that it looked like you said that 90-day shutdown would make the world of difference. And this is also the rare time, and from my experience, and again, I'm 55,
Really?
where I know where I have never seen us as a collective, as a community, as a people who are, together in on the planet, not to take a public health issue and make it so political, right? And I started my work off in HIV and AIDS, and even then we could have conversations around, behavior modification or looking out for people or thinking about what's in the good of the people that you're in community with. And people got that, right, in a real visceral way. And so there is a little bit of a heartbreak. The other thing that I am hearing, and I want to say I'm with you, I have heard of more people impacted by COVID this year than in the past 2 years. I've known more people to die in this past year. I know more people who've been sick and impacted. And that's actually pretty frightening for those of us who've been trying to do sort of a restrictive right thing for a couple of years. And now it feels like, well, I've even heard doctors say it doesn't matter what you're doing, it's eventually everybody's going to get it. And I was like, well, then how did that become the standard? Because that doesn't feel like what we should be saying or aspiring to. So there is grief, right? Grief,
a lot
sorrow,
of it.
right? And despair.
I think it's definitely grief. And though I'm a hardliner, because as you know, Karen, and your viewers may not know, I worked the hospital at the start of this. I was still a chaplain when this all first hit. So my hardline stance coming from having to call people, family members, and children, hey, your mom died, but you can't come say goodbye. Hey, your baby needs to come back here, but I can't let you back here. You have to stay in this waiting room. And so even to the extent that we couldn't even do chaplaincy anymore, I'm calling patients rooms and they just want to be held. And so I think that when you see all of that and to know that we're actually worse off, it's mind blowing. And I also get its grief in the sense of, man, you posted something on Facebook just to show you that I understand it. The excitement about seeing your daughter. And I remember our conversations. I miss my mama and my daughter, Rev. I want to hug them. And so I think that collective grief is also real. If these rates keep rising, me and my sons are professional wrestling fanatics. I don't know if we'll be able to go in February. And it's something we try to do once a month. We'll hit up a city and we'll go. Wow. And so it's a sadness to it, right? As pastor, churches are empty. Part of it is because people don't love Jesus. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. The other part of it is they're scared, right? And so how do you do this in a sense where we acknowledge the collective grief society is feeling, but we still got to be responsible, right? And I think I don't even want to go there to an extent, but it kind of reminds me of this. Oftentimes in American society, we have this duality where we let our emotions lead when common sense should, we just got to have common sense. Not to start any other fights, but this was my argument with the license plate reader, right? very traumatic what's happening, but we don't over surveillance and put tanks on the street, things like how do we find this duality? And I think that we as a society, we've gotten to a place where reason, logic, let's process this, has taken the backseat to my feelings. So I don't want to wear a mask. I'm not going to wear a mask. This is restrictive. I don't want to get a vaccine. I'm just not going to do it. I don't want to stay in the house. I'm just not going to do it. And instead of somebody standing up and say, listen, I get how you feel is real, but this has to be done, or this shouldn't be done. That I don't know how to reconcile that, even as a pastor, as a chaplain. I just don't know. I'm gonna be completely honest in that.
So this is where I think the trauma stuff has really helped me, and has kept me relatively compassionate as best I can. So I realize that what is happening for folks is not logical, right? So many people are making emotional decisions, right? Lower brain, that fight, flight, freeze, fawn response. It is
Yes.
not. And so we have spent probably 2 years trying to rationalize with people and not speak to the emotional center of their brain, right? And so you know this as a minister, right? As a pastor, sometimes, right, it's that you speak to the head, so you want to educate, but then also you've got to connect to the heart. And I don't think that we've done enough heart messaging, because, and some of the reactions also are, maybe connected to some of her historical and intergenerational wounds, right? So if I am maybe a white-bodied person and I've been taught that I need to be free and I need to fight against oppression and, having the government tell me what to do, and it's why my people got on a boat, 400 years ago and migrated across, right?
Right.
I'm not even making a logical decision about that. It's not the same situation, but people who are speaking to me know how to tap into that illogical emotional center. And then I think if you're a person of color or Black bodied, and you have heard or been told or been fed propaganda and myths, right? Some of it is true. And then some of it is mythology around medical experimentation, or
Right.
that you've seen the system not treat you well, or you would wonder, right? Like, all of vaccine fears and hesitancy and medical experimentation and blah, blah, blah. That stuff is so, ingrained in people and then gets reinforced by media, and then people aren't thinking, right? And so they're more afraid of a vaccine, most of whom, because they went to school, been vaccinated for like everything, but now all of a sudden we're tapping into some fears that aren't logical.
And it's funny because I remember was working with the public health department around the time of the vaccine first rolled out. And one of the things I kept stressing, is interesting that you said connect the heart to the head, was that in order for this to work in the African-American community, you have to fall on your sword as a medical profession and say, hey, listen, we know historically we've denied Black women, we've treated them bad. We know that we've seen the studies on that. We know we've denied Black men. We've played games, but this ain't that. Yeah. And so I remember saying, no, nobody care about the facts and Moderna and Johnson stock and all of that. You need to tell them distinctly, hey, we're not trying to Tuskegee you. Hey, this isn't like the HIV/AIDS crisis. This is something different. And I wound up having my biggest success was when I first started trying to argue the intellect side, to your point. I think we do that naturally as teachers. We want you to be better. And so it's a gift and a curse for us, right? So we want you to be better, want you to think, process it. I tell my sisters all the time, we want people to use their higher brain functions, elevate, Malcolm Du Bois, all of that. But folks is not there and they're freaking out. So finally, I remember saying, it's legit if Wall Street took it first. And so that's who they rolled it out to. It wasn't even the people with preconditions. I said, our Congress is taking it, the bankers are taking it, Wall Street, Enron, all of them guys are taking it. So if it was trash, they would have given it to us first. And then people would say, oh, thank you for understanding. That's all I needed to hear. And so it became this this tension. And I think that you're right, depending on where you are. I'd even argue where you are theologically, that we also don't talk about how the church and churches in this area did horrible jobs. I'm covered by the blood of the Lamb and things that Christians say. I don't believe no weapon against me shall prosper. And I always ask people, well, what do you want me to tell the families of at least the 10 Christian families I remember whose loved one died during the height of this? They certainly were praying and fasting and covered. And so I do think that there's a wrestle here. And it's funny that you mentioned, to jump back, your work, HIV/AIDS, because recently I did this thing for the AME Church, this Connectional Bible Study. And I said, this is actually our 6th pandemic. This is the one, however, that we got social media, iPhones, but we had HIV/AIDS, we had the Baki rollback, we had and you're right. I think this is the first pandemic where we haven't been able to have discourse around it, even to the point of the other ones. There was some kind of discourse. They were not necessarily came to a resolution, but you were able to have a conversation.
Absolutely.
People have drawn hard lines in the sand, like even among the clergy class. I remember somebody telling me, stop promoting that vaccine on Facebook, because I was sharing what happened when I got it. And you're using the church for an agenda. What agenda? Because I want people healthy, and you don't need that. No weapon against me shall prosper. I don't know. I've seen this weapon prosper against a lot of people recently. And so I think you raised some excellent points in how to do that. So I guess if I would like to start, like, with the first bullet point is, we got to own our feelings, whatever they are, so we can process them. If you're scared, we need to say that. If you're uncertain, we need to say that. If you're just don't know, you're confused, all of this has gotten confusing, the Omicron, all the Alpha Delta variant, all the variants that are, we need to leave space for feelings. But also, I think people like you, myself, we got to hold the ground on rationality, because it's only if we give in to feelings, then it's only a matter of time before everything else explodes.
Yeah. So I don't know how to toggle that balance, but I do hope, and maybe that's the mission of 2022, is that we make space for people to feel. And if you're somebody who's out there and you're like, I don't know why I'm reacting in the way, sometimes the feelings are in your body, they're not in your head. And so if every time we talk about COVID, or you hear about COVID, you stress up, or you feel tension, or you feel anxious, let's talk about that. And we can work on strategies that way. There are a bunch of folks who can help you be less anxious. Or if you're somebody who's been like, I don't want to hear, and so I'm not listening to news, I'm not taking in information, I'm not reading anything, let's also talk about that. And then and I don't know how to delicately have this conversation, but my daughter and I were talking about this because we have family members who've gone down the rabbit hole, where in the faith community, particularly the sort of more evangelical, I don't know, like the new charismatic Christian, I don't know, where you have, and again, not making fun of any congregation, right? Where there's small groups, and right there has a formula. And again, I'm going to try to say this delicately, but sometimes they watch Daystar or TBN, and not everybody on those channels thinks the same way. I'm acknowledging that there's a lot of variation, but in my family, we have a lot of folks who are those kind of Christians. And they have really, they've had anti-vaccine movies and shows and talks, and there has been just so much of that. And I don't know if the larger public health community is aware of the impact of that sort of evangelical, and I don't know if that's the appropriate word.
I think it's fair to say that,
wing of the faith community that has been really, for the past 2 years, just beating the drum about, being anti-vaccine, and calling this the mark of the beast, and calling this, against God's will, and making it a faith test, and a whole bunch of things. And I remember on Sunday, Jake said, he was like, I am all for having faith, and I believe that I want you to see God, but just not now. Like, it's like, what kind of crazy it would be like if I show up in heaven and God's like, I was not expecting you. And you were like, well, God, I was trying to have faith. And God was like, but I gave you a vaccine because I gave, right. And so I just don't know if I don't know how to language to those folks who are more evangelical. I don't know how to speak to them. I also know, and again, trying not to be too political, I'm gonna stop talking, but there's also linkage, and it's shocking to me that Black people, not that we're not supposed to be immune to conspiracy theories, but how that it's also gotten tied to like QAnon. And again, there's
Yeah, I
lots of
got you.
right, like it's down the rabbit hole, and I don't know if we've talked enough about that.
But I think here's the rub. And I'm gonna go here and I'm gonna jump back. While I understand why, for the show and other purposes, we do need to talk about how this has been politicized, though, because people have used this as a way to further an agenda to harm people. We had a sitting president who ignored it back in the December prior. I remember everybody got the flu, the super flu prior to 2020. I know I had it. Super flu came out of nowhere. It wiped you out. And we now are wondering, was that the early stages of COVID? Probably 90%.
Oh yeah. I believe so.
When stay-at-home orders took the government too long to roll out because this section didn't want to give up their perception of power, right? All while mandating what other people of color and women do with their bodies. They didn't want you to mandate this over here. I also believe conspiracy theories come when rational intellectual people don't speak up and provide information. And so while because it's either a conspiracy or it's not, right? And so even than that. So I also always put the challenge on progressive minded folks to rise to the occasion and challenge. So when people tell me, hey, the vaccination is the mark of the beast, they can track you. I hold this up. They've been tracking us for 20 years, bro. From the first time they moved to SIM cards back in 99, they've been tracking us. I can talk to you. I can say, Karen, that's a lovely black top. I'm gonna get 27 Facebook ads about Karen's black tops and lovely, some kind of variation. So we're already tracked. You can't do nothing in this country without a social security number, driver's license,
credit card, debit card.
Right. I got more credit cards than the law should allow. So I'm already tracked. That's when people Facebook the 10-year challenge. They trying to get your picture. Brother, you've been putting selfies on the internet for 10 years. They got your progression. So I think that slowing folks down when they say that, especially as faith leaders, when we talk about healing and restoration, one of my favorite Bible stories, and I just had to look it up to get the exact scripture, is about Naaman and the Syrian girl, right? In the Christian tradition, 2 Kings 5, 1-19. And Naaman had leprosy, and so he wanted to be cured. And so he called for the prophet based off of his servant. And he thought the prophet was going to do this great miracle. And the prophet told him, man, go take a bath and go lay down. And he got offended at that. And so when his people said, hey, listen, you wanted this super vaccine, but all you do is wash your hands and go lay down, mask up, you was okay. And so it's kind of, we as faith leaders, I think probably more so than anybody else, has a spiritual obligation not to spread hysteria. So when members of Bethel come to me talking about they drink sea moss and, they don't believe in the vaccine because Jesus ain't said none of that. Yeah. Sea moss don't work, and you can't come in here and vaccinate. Yeah. That's what it is, my man. That's what it is, sister. And so, some people have liked it. It has had a negative impact, but as a faith leader, I have to, again, help you own your feelings, but also I can't let you use your feelings to drive us into hysteria and madness. We got to pause, right? Because I've been saying this for 2 months. It's always impossible to walk this stuff back. Our kids are going to be cleaning up this COVID mess. Well, we got older kids, so our grandkids will be cleaning up this COVID mess. And they're going to look at us and say, why am I fixing a problem from 2020 in 2050? Why am I dealing with the people, elderly that can't smell, elderly that can't breathe? Why am I dealing with this? And so I think that we do need to appropriately have political conversations, because everything is political in this country. We need to look at the impact of capitalism. Workers and companies, they're struggling, and so they don't want to lose another round of employees for 6 months to unemployment. So that's why I believe the big emphasis was go back to work, go back to school.
Absolutely, yeah.
And I think we need to talk about that. And so I think I would also put that as point two. This is not a vacuum. A great movie I would encourage everybody to watch. I love teaching with movies. Is Don't Look Up. It might as well be a documentary,
Yeah.
and understand that all of this is connected.
It's hard though. It's a hard movie.
It's a hard movie, but it is a accurate portrayal of this pandemic and what we're going through. And so I think I need us to understand that even while we're fighting off this deadly illness, we still got to deal with structures and systems and that play into it.
Yeah. So I love all of your reflections and articulation. And I also, we said this in the beginning, it reveals so many structural, inequalities and inequities. So, one, I have always thought like this is, the show is not like an inherently faith show, but like one of the priorities and one of my values is that we always do develop policies, procedures, and practices about those who are most vulnerable. And, and I feel like frequently our response across the board around employees and systems and schools has not been about how do we look out for those who are most vulnerable with health challenges, or, we know that if you have a mental health need or a physical health need or any other sort of pre-existing issues, you've been more vulnerable, and those folks have been more impacted and will continue to be more impacted. We've not had this conversation. I was listening to this really great podcast around disability needs. Our disability infrastructure is not designed for a long COVID. We don't talk enough about the fact that some COVID for about a third of people are going to lead to long-term, cognitive problems, heart problems, kidney problems, neurological problems, not just people who are elderly and not people who just have severe disease. And we don't have, you're seeing those people, come through, looking for rental assistance who can't go back to work. And we have not built an infrastructure to allow them to heal and recover. And what we offer for disability services now is already inadequate. And we have a drove, like when you look at 1 million people being impacted by COVID, just a third of those could have some long-term adverse health outcome. And so, I don't see us as a community building this infrastructure that's going to be sustainable to take care of people. And we could have prevented it, but now we're talking, as you said, a generation of folks who are going to have to try to wait to fund it, to Social Security it, to, home-based health services, giving people leave, changing employment rules, right? Like just a lot of structural changes because we've got, we have not looked out for the most vulnerable.
And I think that's a big part of it, which is interesting because I remember I'm a Gen Xer similar to you, and you had to get vaccinated. Homeless student with a family, like we'll bring the clinic to you. We'll come out to you. And somewhere I think we've lost that as a society in the midst of all the hyperpolitic, in the midst of everything that's going on. It's really crazy. It is, and it's mind numbing. And I think that's where, I've often had to tell myself over the past. Now I realized I sent the email today saying we're approaching the 24th month of this. Yeah. Yeah. It's numbing. It's mind-numbingly jarring, if you will,
and heartbreaking. So we've talked about some of the solutions. So our advice, one would be, hey, we need a more robust human response to these conversations. So if you are somebody who has compassion fatigue and have joined and again, I hate to say this, but the hurry up and die caucus, right? Because there are a group of people who are like, well, if you don't want to figure it out, then that's fine. Then, but if you are somebody who has kept your heart open, and is informed and educated, we do encourage you to continue to have those heartfelt conversations with people, allowing people to feel their feelings and being their feelings, and also make sure that you have information and logic. If you remember, Try did a Spread Love Not COVID campaign, and we want you to continue. We're going to be pushing that out even more, because we really want people to approach this from a spirit of love.
And I think that's critical. And it's funny because ultimately, on top of political, Karen, I do believe, and I'm not just saying this because I'm a pastor, I'm saying this because I believe this. This is a moment of divine love. This is a moment to check your heart and your spirit, right? Yeah. The Hurry Up and Die Coalition, that's clear that the folks that want you to come back to work to underpay you, that their hearts and souls. So what I've often raised to others is, especially people of faith, and especially people who operate in my same faith tradition and context, what about the scriptures about not bringing harm to your brother? What about the scripture about not, doing anything to stumble children, take care of the vulnerable among us? And so I believe also that this is a spiritual disease problem. And because American Christianity in its current form is either hyper-patriotic, hyper-capitalist, or both, the communal aspect of it, right? I don't have to get vaccinated and wear a mask because I'm blessed. I'm blessed and highly favored. And what I'm laying out here is our faith traditions, all of them. But in this, I'm speaking to the one in which I have some expertise. The Christian tradition is communal. And so my behavior should benefit the whole of the community. So I would tell church folk, to me, this is a salvation question. When you stand before God at the end of life, if that, for those of us who believe, and God says, listen, in 2022, all I asked you to do was sit home for 2 months and wear a mask if you had to go out. That's right. You told me, no, you're going to do what you want to do. Yeah. I'm going to hold you to account for all these people you made sick and frustrated and scared. And I think until we start looking at it like that, and until pastors start talking like that, people are not going to connect the dots. We've tried to connect the dots intellectually. So now we got to talk spiritually and emotionally. How do I get you to understand that this is bigger than you?
So I'm thinking this is the season of the Beatitudes, right? Mm-hmm. That we really need to promote and make sure that people understand what the witness is, right? Supposedly, right, the greatest commandment, in the Judeo-Christian tradition is to love our neighbors as ourselves. And if we're not, right, like it is the ultimate commandment. And who is your neighbor? Right. It is everybody. And so why would I don't know who it has a vulnerability. I don't know who has a pre-existing illness. I don't know who has to take care of their grandma. I don't know who has a sick kid with asthma. I don't know that. But I also know that, if we just look at our numbers, statistically, our kids have asthma and diabetes and pre-existing issues. Our seniors have many health complications, and most of us probably meet the criteria, right, based on the scale of being obesity. So if we have high blood pressure or kidney problems or diabetes, we're those people. And so how do we be in community together? You said something that I thought that maybe we should, I told you I wanted to shift up because we're looking at the King weekend coming up, and it's always, right, that $1 million question, like, what would King do, right? That seems to be the proverbial question. But what do you think that this moment calls for those of us who also have a social justice lens, not only just a faith walk?
I think, honestly, in this season, going into this, I'm going to encourage us first to pace ourselves. One of the things I like about you as a person is that you pick your spots. You are the Daniel Day-Lewis of this work. You're not going to take any role, any speaking engagement. It has to be relevant, concise to what I'm going to do. And I think this is probably why I'm approaching compassion fatigue and burnout, and you're not. And so one of the things I've sat and wrestled with is where do I belong? Where do I speak? Where do I use my voice? Because it is a lot going on out here, right? Even in the midst of COVID, we had civil unrest. Even in the midst of COVID, yesterday it was an anniversary of a coup d'etat attempt for all intents and purposes. On top of a pandemic, right? There's a housing crisis. There's an education. So I would say that for us, the people who are called to this work, we have to excuse me one second. The joys of living with young adults. Sorry, y'all. That's what happens when you live with young adults. Put them out. The we have to pace ourselves. So that's one. Two, King would invoke the beloved community here. I believe that his theology, especially post 65 King, which we don't talk about, which is probably why I'm over King events, because we stop at his life at Birmingham. I know we got a big thing coming up here, and we're gonna act like the man didn't have a whole 3 years where he went left and radical, but this is the King I'm talking about.
And had an economic strategy, and a full employment strategy, and that's what killed him.
He would challenge us like he did in Vietnam and say, listen, what are we doing here? So are we sending people back to work to make money for some billionaire? Are we sending people back to work? Even, not, of course, small business owners said to me, I'm not a billionaire, I'm not Jeff Bezos. Well, I mean, but are you asking people to come back to work in a pandemic in which you're not able to adequately pay them or provide them health insurance? King would challenge our assumptions on our individuality and our right. Do we have a right to kill each other? At what point, do we have a right to not sit down? And so I believe Dr. King would be vocal about this in this moment. He would question the morality of all of this, like he did with Vietnam, like he did with the economic systems. He would question the morality. He would say, listen, this ain't moral. This ain't just, this ain't Christ-like. And I think King wouldn't be wrong. I think he wouldn't be wrong. I think he would also push those of us who have the energy and know our lanes to get engaged. And so that does mean, okay, you may not be able to do this over here, but you can do something. So me, I'm cutting back, but Bethel remains open for anybody that wants to do vaccination clinics. If you need something like this where we can talk about trauma, I'm open. You have to do something. And then I think ultimately we're going to have a reckoning of how much of this is tied to our soul salvation. So I have somebody, young man who I like, and he told me he wasn't getting a vaccine because it was something. And I asked him, what does that say about your faith in your salvation? That you won't do this simple act because you think that you're important enough for them to put a microchip in.
Yeah, right. So you said, I want to just sort of slow down. So the first thing, and I've seen a lot in like online articles, whatever, that speak to this, for those of us who care and who are activists or who are engaged in some sort of healing, helping, change work, make sure your tank is full. Right. And that making sure that you have a village of support, that you make time for rest, that you're strategic about where you invest your time, talent, and energy. And I can't say that enough, because what we know even physiologically is if you're burned out or tapped out, you're more vulnerable in so many different ways. And we need people to sort of stick around, right? We need you here, and we need you fortified, and we need you sustainable. And I would hope we are in a community, in a village, where we're looking out for each other in this moment of rest. And we're not doing, oh, come on, or we're not respecting people's boundaries, and we're giving people, permission to say no, because all of those things are necessary and needed. The second thing that you said that I think I want to sort of unpack a bit is that, King probably would be asking people to think about the morality of these issues this time, and their stance and what they're doing. This post-traumatic, one of the things that makes people have post-traumatic stress disorder is this moral injury, when you do things that violate your sense of ethics, your sense of right and wrong, your sense of, and if you keep doing things that are violating your sense of ethical responsibility, it costs your heart, and then you have to either medicate or cover up or deny or become callous. It will respond in a certain way, but the cost to your heart is so great when you are out of line. And so if you're more from a corporate reason or an individual reason, this moment is asking us to not harm ourselves, right? We think about harming others, but this is a real selfish thing. And then he would also be speaking, I know he would be speaking to congregations and institutions about what have we done? What are we doing collectively to make sure our people are good? How do we stay on the front end of providing and protecting people's hearts, minds, souls, bodies, and spirits? Because all of them, we know, are wounded right now.
Yes. I think what you lifted up is critical, though, because I think you and I make the same, probably sometimes make the same assumption, and this is an assumption, that everybody's moving from a space of ethics. And so I think that we got to get back to that hard conversation. People struggle with us, Karen, because we have ethics. We're not going to do a thing. I'm not going to violate, to your point, because the minute I violate who I am, I take this position. I violate my ethics. I can't sleep. My migraines come. I eat out of frustration. It wrecks my body, and it's all because I knew I should have said no when I said yes. And so for me, ethics is a thing, and I think that we got to get back to talking ethically. Now, again, I think that's how you bridge the emotions and the minds. But there's an ethic to this, and I think there's morality to this. You got to be able to stand on something. And I think far too many of us, especially in our community, we think ethics is this bad thing, or is respectability politics, or, you too radical. But no, it's just a set of values that I have that I'm not going to betray, because I think that it's tied into my divinity, my God side, my relationship with the divine. And so I think King would call us to review our morals and our ethics. What are you saying? Even if you're not trying to, what are you saying when you can't sacrifice for a lot? And again, this isn't and I think also because we don't parse these things out, this is not, being asked to wear a mask is not slavery. And I think we have to stop letting people use that hyperbole. Being asked to get vaccinated is not Tuskegee, where they denied treatment, not gave treatment. I think that it's incumbent to say, what we're on, is it ethical and is it moral? And I think we got to start getting back to that and holding intention, feelings, and emotions, but we can't or cannot do a thing based off of emotions. Of the Christian faith tradition says the heart is deceitful, who can trust it? And so my mama used to say, you feel one way at noon and you done change your mind by 2:00. And so that should not be the framework for making sound decisions. And I also think King would speak out, knowing the way Dr. King, from what I've read, he'd speak out against the propaganda. It was King that coined the famous education is to help you move around something to the extent of to move around propaganda. It helps you see through it. So King would definitely call out the media, call out other pastors who saying crazy stuff like, I just need to, take communion and I'm okay. He would challenge that. I believe in my spirit, ultimately, because he's trying to get us to take care of each other. And then I think those were resources who do care. This is the season to step up.
Mhm.
You know of an organization and you got two nickels to rub together that need $10,000, give it to that organization, give it to that person, help them finance the work that you're interested in but don't want to get your hands dirty. Help them finance that kind of work. And so I think that and King would say a lot more. He would challenge the government. Again, you're putting capital above human lives. As you mentioned it earlier, that's literally what he was killed for, challenging the government. He wasn't killed registering the right to vote, like people say. He was killed during a garbage strike, sanitation, an economic dispute. And while he was trying to set up the Poor People's Campaign,
That's
in
exactly.
Tent City. So even King would stop this capitalist system and say, listen, y'all, that's all y'all can find for the American people is $3,000, because your drone costs 36 million. So that's all you can find for the American people. You want them to shop, you want them to pay bills, etc. But this is where you ended it at. I don't know if King wouldn't have called that out too.
Oh, right. I would 100% agree from my understanding with everything that you said. And I sort of have, for a while, I think in my childhood, I thought I wanted to be King. So I, throughout most of my young adulthood, read everything that he wrote that I could access. So both the piece around he would be speaking truth about the complexity of needs and around our accountability to other. He would be talking to allies. He'd be talking to governments. He'd be saying, what does love require? So as you said, the beloved community, and how, and that's a verb and not sort of this passive activity. The other thing that I've been really reflecting on, and maybe it's because I have been watching, glimpse of women of the movement, is that I think people missed how much health and access to health was a part of the civil rights struggle.
Yes.
Right? Those people think about it as just politics, but my ability to be a full person, well taken care of, having access to care, being able to live a long life, reducing those health disparities. I mean, right, like all of those things were also a part of what led people to the table, because we were dying and not getting care and not being well served. And I just think for somebody to tell me Black Lives Matter and then not to take their health situation seriously, not to look out for their grandma or their auntie or cousin or whatever, just is a heartbreak. Because if you're concerned about community violence, if you're concerned about Black Lives Matter, if you're concerned about any of that, then you have to me, also have a responsibility around COVID, because people fought and died for not only your access to vote, but for your access to be, right? To be a person and to stay well.
Yes. I think that I agree, and I resonate. It's one of these moments where I try to operate in grace, but if you telling me you out here trying to stop the violence and yet you won't stop a pandemic, I don't think you're trying to stop the violence, because the pandemic is violent. And so that means you're just caring about the mass gun violence, which is tied to hyper masculinity, etc. I question you too. I question your spirituality. And when you tell me I ain't gonna get the vaccine, I don't believe in Jesus, but I don't know. My Bible teaches that you don't stumble anybody, you don't bring harm to anybody. Love yourself, love God, love community. On these two commandments, hang on law and the prophets. So I definitely believe that there's this, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm drawing a blank on the word, but I definitely think that you're right, that we have to lift that up. I think, though, it goes back to two things we don't like to talk about at the heart of this that are critical to this: theology, God, religion, and politics. Because even in what you said is, I'm not going to be political. And I tell people all the time, and I really, really want to get back to teaching that here in the community that I think needs this critical consciousness. Everything is political. Everything is political, from what groceries they put in your store, to gas prices, to what they do at the mall, to business, to your job, to your relationship. Politics is simply who gets what, when, where, how, and why, and who has power or shared power. Like politics is like air, it's like the force, it's all around you. Like there's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
And so same thing with theology. How you see the world and how you see God is how you show up. So when you tell me I don't wear a mask, I put you in the same place of people that flex. I'm not going to stop listening to R. Kelly. That is the weirdest flex to me. I'm not going to get vaccinated.
We have to have a whole conversation about that, right?
Like what you just told me is you don't care about the care and suffering of others, that you're not operating in the space of Jesus. You're more operating in the space of Kant, Nietzsche, the self above others. That's the epitome of Eurocentric thought and process. I am because I think, not I am because we are, right? And I'm drawing clear dichotomies in philosophy. I definitely side eye you when you talk about Black Lives Matter, but you ain't gonna wear a mask. Well, then Black lives don't matter. Only this type of Black life matters, which is equally as problematic when other side does it. So I think that, yes, you are 100% correct that there are some deeper conversations we have to force to the table. If I was in a room with Biden, why won't you shut this thing down?
Yeah, I have wondered about that too. And I realize we're almost out of time, but the other thing that I would love, and I don't know how we do this, so this is me talking out loud, is that I believe that if we loved ourselves and had more people who were reminding us, because I don't care, like I have family in Florida and I, remind them, doesn't matter what your governor says. If you know that your life matters, you take care of yourself. You don't need like a mandate that comes from, your governor or your mayor to tell you how to keep you and yours safe. Like you can figure this out, and know that even if the government doesn't care about you, I care about you. I need you to care about you. And I need you to see yourself as valuable. And I see that lack of self-love, that internalized racism, sexism, oppression, that not knowing that your life matters gets reflected in both COVID, community violence, our STI rate, our health issue, right? And I was like, if we could figure out this piece around you matter enough to me that I don't want you to self-harm. Like imagine the mental health, the wellness, the growth, I was like, it's all interconnected, because if I love me, I ain't gonna it doesn't matter what people tell me, I'm gonna take care of me.
It's funny because I dare say, and I've said it publicly, I'll say it on here, this community suffers severely from an intense self-love. It suffers from a lack of a critical consciousness, a conscientization. And I think that the absence of both of these create problems. So I'm glad you said it, because the gun violence goes up with COVID, right? So we don't talk about that. So if I don't love you enough not to wear a mask and get vaccinated, then there's no way there's an expectation. It's almost silly to expect you not to operate in the space of violence, because the first act is violence, right? And so I think that we have to figure out a way, and I'll tell you my theories offline, but we have to figure out a way to get to the heart of that. I was telling my young people coming up in Bethel, when I was coming up, great Negroes past and present, young, gifted, and Black. We heard the poetry. What shall I tell my children who are Black? Hey, Black child. We was proud. You had the little ebony thick books and volumes, and we had Black History program. Who you want to be when you grow up? You want to be, and
even Jet, right?
I was watching last night because I was bored, Unsung, about a different world, and how even if you struggle with the apoliticalness of the Cosby Show, you couldn't deny that a different world was something, and we don't have that. No. And so I think that's the third thing I would probably add, is the cultural component. Do you love yourself, Black people? And I'm speaking to my communities, apply this to anybody. That's just who I am. But do you love yourself? And to not give in to hysteria. And I don't think that internally or externally we promote self-love. we can love everybody else. I've often said the most disrespected person in America and in Champaign-Urbana in this area is Black women. I've never seen sisters disrespected like to the degree. And I'm from the South Side of Chicago, and I had real life pimp living on my block, and I still ain't seen the level of disrespect I see in the past 3 years. And put that in context. There's a pimp 5 doors down, and I still saw more respect in that construct than I do daily in Champaign-Urbana. And so I think that we have to talk about that too, Karen. I think that where, not you, but where we keep messing up is we keep trying to say this COVID and this violence.
Yeah.
Nah, all these conversations had to have simultaneously. So during COVID, what happened to the domestic violence rates?
Mm-hmm.
During COVID, are our babies passing because when they come out of virtual space and they get told they got to repeat the 8th grade, what is the impact on that? What is the impact on a mama who knowingly has to send her child to school with COVID, to send your child with the plague into a space with other babies because your boss at McDonald's ain't gonna give you the day off?
Yeah. And imagine being that baby. What does that mean to you in terms of how you see yourself? And so all of the wounds and scars. And so my heart, one of the, right, our project is called Healing Communities. And we started that right in the middle of COVID because we knew neighbor by neighbor, block by block, person by person, we're going to need so much deep healing. And I loved your reflection though. And maybe we go back to basics around how do we increase people's capacity for self-love? And how do you see that I love and value you? And not only does it seem like this abstract thing, but I demonstrate that you get reflective mirrors that say, we love and value you, you matter. Because if you don't feel that and you don't believe it, all bets are off. Like, no matter how logical I can be, this is really back to basics. Like, you got to know that you're worth it. We want you. We love you. We care for you.
We need you here.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a critical piece, because it's, again, thinking back to the other pandemics, even with HIV and AIDS, that was one of the things. Love yourself. Yeah. Love yourself to wrap up. Don't be out here reckless, because if you're out here reckless, then clearly you don't love yourself. If you know being out here reckless is death. It was the same thing with drugs, man. I know life is hard, but love yourself. Don't put that in your body, because you can't ever. So we got to get back to that. We keep making unnecessary martyrs, like even with gun violence, like we make martyrs out of things that shouldn't be martyred. And so we got to get back to, man, do you love yourself? Like, simple question. Do you love yourself? If you love yourself, same thing, my doctor, I loved him for it. I love him. And he asked me that. He said, all right, man, so we got to get your health in order. You stressed? He said, oh, you love yourself, right? And I said, absolutely. I'm a Leo. I was born in August. He said, then we'll make these changes, right? Yep, you got it, Doc, because I love myself. And so I do think that that's a part of it. Do you love yourself? And if you love yourself, then you will love the person that looks like you and share cultural space with you and not bring harm, either through the violence of not doing what you're supposed to do and ultimately not bringing harm. And so I dare say the last thing I will leave people with is deep unplug. Unplug. This stuff will have you, I tease my sister, Reverence Power. She's pastor up in Hazelcrest. And one day she had called me about 17 times. She was on the CDC. She was on the Illinois World IUPD. She was on this site. She had read on. And I said, if you don't turn the computer off and you don't turn the phone off, I'm driving up there and throw it out the window. And I need you to unplug, because she had worked herself into a frenzy. And so, and then just didn't help, And so I think that, if you're struggling with everything else, we suggest simply log off and go drink a cup of coffee, man. Take 10 minutes away from it.
And so, get back to those, as we started off with, those back to basic, that self-care, those wellness strategies, wellness in every different domain. So friendship, spiritual. And probably my last thing is, if you don't love yourself, and many people for lots of very legitimate reasons don't know who they are, then reach out. connect to a community of people who see you as having worth. Tell somebody, right? Like, speak up. And sometimes you fake it till you make it. You think about the value of your mother or people who've loved you or the child that you have. Sometimes you do it for them. And eventually, if you're around them in the right spirit, you can catch the love, right? And so, none of us are fearless alone. Some of us have been broken. Some of us have not had positive reflective mirrors. And I get that. But I do know that there are a lot of people who want to love on you and can keep your tank full and will care for you, who would be devastated, right? Like, imagine your funeral would be devastated if you were not here. And so let us love on you for you until you can feel it. But just believe that love is there.
Yeah, I agree. I just believe love is there. I think I can put it on a t-shirt, because ultimately that's what it boils down to. Just believe love is there, and we can make it through this. Hopefully this time next year we'll be talking about how to clean up in the aftermath of the pandemic, not how to survive it. So
yeah, thank you so much. This was hopefully people felt like I wouldn't have thought about a better New Year's kickoff conversation than having a conversation with you. It's always such a pleasure, and continue to do amazing good work in this community. So thank you
so much. You too. I appreciate all that you do.
Stay well.
Yes, ma'am.